Nice to meet everyone, good afternoon. For those who haven't met me yet, Jacob Petito, representing Global App Testing. I've been a short store this year. So glad to see everyone here, and it's always a pleasure to be part of these events, to kind of see old connections and new ones. So thank you very much for the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes. You know, Global App Testing has been around beyond 10 years now. We're a stone throw away from over here. We're an angel, and working with organisations, you know, pre-MVP all the way to large enterprises, working on various amounts of challenges, and challenges will vary based on QA maturity, the technical team's abilities and maturity, and it's exciting consistently to work with those type of clients and see how they change throughout the process. And part of my role is I get to start off those conversations, have those conversations from the beginning, and hear about the challenges that are going on in QA teams and technical teams, product teams, software engineering teams. And in that startup to scale up phase, a lot of the feedback that I get about the challenges is often around, you know, giving more time back to the QA team or the product or the developers, reducing the bottlenecks around manual QA, and often just trying to just get that velocity of testing going across test cases and exploratory testing, and trying to integrate that into our crowd of 50,000 testers directly back into their tool stack on each year on GitHub. And since 2019, we've had the pleasure of working with a million ads, and to give some more in-depth, you know, yeah, oh my gosh, tripping over my words there, in-depth insight into their journey. We've got Mohan Taylor, CPO of a million ads, and it's been exciting for us to see how rapidly they've grown over the time that we build them. So I'll do the best thing for this event right now and get out of the way for the Mo, if you'd like to join us. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Mo Taylor, I'm the CPO at Million Ads. We're a 6-year-old startup, maybe scale up, we're probably past that stage being a startup at this point. And we do dynamic audio advertising. So these are some of the brands that we work with, so hopefully you recognise a lot of those. And you can hear our ads on pretty much anywhere that you get IP-based streamed audio. So you're probably familiar with people like Spotify. If you're listening to Spotify on a free tier, you might have heard one of our ads. So to explain a little bit about what we do, I'm going to show you a little video, which is a walkthrough of one of the recent audio campaigns that we did for a fairly large fast food company.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Sorry for the early start.
No worries.
It's a McDonald's wrap-up video. You do the opening line, then we'll play the ad in full. Take one.
Okay, here we go. McDonald's challenged Leo Burnett, OMD, and a million ads to announce the nationwide rollout of McDelivery. Thank Christ. The solution, a groundbreaking personalised audio campaign dynamically reprogramming the great British public that it's okay to eat a Macca's in one's dressing gown at home. How's that?
Go.
Fillet of fish from a dish. Flat whites for working nights. Big Mac down a cul-de-sac and even under a drying rack. Veggie deluxe and power cuts. Medium fries and rainy skies. Or maybe cheeseburgers in the bath. How daft. Wraps through cat flaps, nugs on runs, or perhaps a chicken legend to the river. Because now we deliver. Click in your player and enjoy McDonald's at home. McDelivery. Now available in Leicester.
Shame it isn't for hash browns.
It is. It's dynamic. The lines change. Here's midday.
Strawberry shakes and midday breaks.
Here's the evening.
Share box and evening frocks.
And here's one for you. Here's the morning.
Hash browns in dressing gowns.
Oh, perfect.
And it uses weather as well. So we've got sunny,
Medium fries and sunny skies.
cloudy,
Cloudy skies.
and the rain outside here, stormy as well.
Medium fries and stormy skies.
I'm actually loving it.
And it uses your device too. So here's Apple.
Download Uber Eats on the App Store and enjoy McDonald's at home.
And one for your Android phone.
Download Uber Eats on Google Play Store and enjoy McDonald's at home.
Do they deliver here? Let's have a look.
Now available in Lancaster,
No.
Liverpool.
Almost.
Now available in London.
Bingo.
Ooh, loving those stats.
Do you get it then?
I think I do. Should we get some reason?
So hopefully that gives you a little kind of glimpse of some of the stuff that we do. The general, a very quick pitch is by taking something that's highly relevant, improving the context of that ad, reducing the frequency that we keep playing you the same ad by using sequential and things like that, by giving you relevance around time and day, location, weather outside. It makes the ad more relevant to you, and as a listener, more palatable. We all like getting free stuff, it gets paid for by advertising, but you get bored of repetitive same old ads every time. The idea is to make it more relevant to you. You remember it more, and the brand gets better spend, and you buy the products that you like. So next, we're going to start right at the beginning as a startup, and maybe this is your image of what a startup looks like. This is a screen grab from the Silicon Valley series, and you can see the nice bean bags. It's all coloured. There's probably Cokes in the fridge and snacks in the cupboard. Our startup story didn't quite start like that. It was a basement office. It was actually below the basement office. A very small number of us. There was just 3 of us who started the business. We had the delightful window looking out on the Savoy rubbish collection point, so we had the dumper trucks coming in every few minutes to compact the garbage. So that was our startup story, but it was really interesting. We were very much focused on delivering a product, and so this made us have a very agile process. So when we started off, it very much looked like this. We would prioritise things. We would work on them. There'd be 1 or 2 things in progress, which is kind of that Kanban style, and deliver them. QA in this process was pretty much minimal. We were focusing very much on stability of things like ad delivery. Our product is split in 2. We actually deliver millions and millions of ads out every single day, so we have infrastructure which is supporting ad delivery. That has to work 24/7, 7 days a week. It can't go down. If it goes down, we lose money. So we spent all of our effort in terms of QA looking at that part of the puzzle. And we were building a user interface to allow creatives to build these kind of ads. You can imagine trying to build an ad that's got millions of variants in it. It's actually quite hard. But we were using our own internal team to build ads at this point. So actually they were our alpha testers, our beta testers, and our GA users at the same time. And so our QA was very informal and done by the team in-house. But things were to change. Most people in the UK have not heard of Pandora. They're the 2nd largest streaming company in the US after Spotify. We signed a deal with them. So suddenly things changed. We had some external users using our product with high expectations, with their own revenue targets that they were trying to aim for using our software product. This is a nice little picture of this guy, Nick. He's a digital audio producer at Pandora. He's building our first ad over in Oakland, California, that they were putting live. And he was one of our users. So suddenly we had to take their demands, and suddenly we had a problem around what we were going to do with QA. That growth came with, thankfully, a nice new office. You can see there's actually a window that looks out on the outside world. We had corporate colours on the walls and everything. It was amazing. But with this came a change in the business focus. Sales teams were focusing on what they should be doing, which is selling, not doing QA. The engineers were focused on building the product and still doing some QA at the same time. Our creative team was still using our product, but they were focused on actually getting ads out the door rather than testing our beta features. So, an interesting point in time. And just show you, whilst I'm talking, a little kind of video of the product as it is at that point in time. And you'll see that it's actually started to become quite a complex product. So our kind of idea of testing things through just purely the back end and doing user manual testing on the front end was starting to show some creaks and problems around the edges. So what do? Do we start building a QA team internally? We're all based in London, so that's a really damn expensive place to be hiring people. Not just the cost of salaries, but also the cost of the office, all the benefits and things like that. And as a small startup, cash is everything. You're making decisions around where you're putting that cash. Do you get more development resources? Do you put it in your marketing budget? Do you put it in hiring more salespeople, or do you put it in QA? And at this point in time, we didn't really want to build a massive QA team in-house. Also, my previous role to Million Ads, I had an in-house QA team, and we worked in very much a old-fashioned waterfall model, where there'd be 6 monthly releases and a massive QA cycle at the end. We didn't want to replicate that. We liked our agile process and wanted to keep it. Do we go external? So do we look at a partner to help us? Challenging with that is that they don't know our product, they don't know us, they're not sitting with us every day, they don't understand the features that we're building, And so there'd be a lot of work that we'd have to do to hand over that every single time we wanted a test run. So we thought we'd go with a hybrid model. So the hybrid model is we have some internal resources who are kind of the experts on the product, and then we use an external test partner. So we picked GAT back in 2019, and so the model that we came up with is that we would do all of our due diligence in-house, look at the functional specs that we were writing, the requirements that were being generated. That tester would actually work with the engineering teams and then work with our external test partner to give us scale, so we can actually get our results back in a short time. So, what did our process look like? Nothing surprising. We took stuff off a backlog, we worked on it. We now have 3 environments. It's amazing. We've got a development environment and a staging environment and a production environment. That engagement with GAT started with them helping us write some test cases, so it got us off the ground immediately. And then we hired our internal resource and we started elaborating all of those lovely test cases. So we got to actually a really high level of test case coverage pretty quickly. We were investing in API testing, investing in unit testing. We actually started then investing in a lot of end-to-end automation testing. And the GAT people put their hands in areas. The aim was to try and reduce the number of manual tests. We kind of bought into the vision of having full automation end-to-end, and we didn't really think we would need manual testing eventually. Maybe it would be for like some beta features or something like that. So we thought we were on a really good track. But there was definitely some problems that were kind of creeping in. As we kind of had taken a bit more process on board, things have become a bit more solidified. Our kind of very agile nature that we had before was starting to not be quite as agile as we had hoped. The amount of work that we were putting into our end-to-end testing wasn't actually being shown in terms of value. It was actually really expensive for us to start building automation tests on quite a complex user interface. Maybe you saw in there, but there's parts of our application where you're actually doing fades and volume adjustments and drag and drops within a kind of web-based audio editor. It's actually quite a tricky application to automate. So we're putting a lot of effort in there, but we weren't really seeing the value. We weren't seeing any kind of value coming back from those end-to-end tests above what we were actually doing for our manual testing. The manual testing was giving far more value back at that point in time than actually the end-to-end automation tests. Our internal QA team, which had kind of grown by this point, was starting to feel a bit isolated. They felt like they were starting to be at the end of the process rather than actually in the middle of the process. Interestingly, although we've always kept our kind of bug count pretty low, the bugs were starting to be an interrupt. So the engineers were finding that they were having to stop what they're working on to address a bug. And that's really bad. If you know anything about context switching, that time it takes to context switch to something else and then context switch back to what you're working on just hits your velocity. You know if somebody interrupts you when you're in the middle of that zone, that you probably take a good half an hour either side to actually get back into what we're doing. So we're finding that the bugs that were coming back are actually interrupting them. That's not great. That impacts velocity. And so what you were seeing actually velocity as we were growing the engineering team was actually decreasing rather than increasing. That's really not good. Definitely not good when you're spending money on expensive engineering resources. And the final thing is that we recognise that our Kanban agile approach, where we worked on things and just delivered them when they were done, had turned into a mini waterfall. And it's not that an iteration is bad. In fact, a lot of companies would look at, we were working on a 1-week iteration and look at that and go, that's amazing to actually be able to get product changes out the door every single week. But the problem is you're fixing it based on a time point. It became a rigid point in time that you were doing things like merging code, pushing it to testers, delivering it to production. And that's not good when you're trying to increase your velocity. So you've probably seen this kind of a triangle before, which is that kind of nice classic one of where you should be putting all of your effort from a testing perspective. And we bought into this, absolutely. The interesting thing here is, we were doing all the good things on the kind of back-end testing, units and API testing, front-end unit testing, had really good levels of coverage on all of those. But the top two were interesting. In our world, these are reversed. In fact, actually, the manual testing is probably somewhere in the middle of that stack. I think if you had an internal QA team where you were paying for all the resources in-house and you were, you had to start your tests on a Monday and it would take a week to run your tests manually, then maybe that's the case. But certainly for us, we were pushing stuff to GAT on a Friday. And so end of day, it would all the manual tests would go off to GAT. Monday morning, great, they're all back. So actually the effort involved in us using manual testing was actually really low. And in fact, actually, there's no difference if we were to run 100 tests over a weekend or 1,000 tests. It didn't impact anybody's day. Maybe GT did. Okay. So what about our kind of process? And what was the problem in that? Because it feels like that's not a bad process to actually follow. And again, you know, I think at other companies, I would have dreamt of a release cycle that worked on a weekly basis. But the thing that we found is that the development week is the first kind of 3 points on here. You know, the engineers at the beginning of the week are planning their work, they're working on it, and they're merging it to develop throughout that week. And then this gate happens, which is on Friday. This was on Friday for us, where we would push everything over to GAT. We'd get our results back on a Monday morning. We'd triage the bugs that come back. We'd then deploy it. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that that's the next week. The engineers are now moving on to something else. It's not something which they are interested in. They've swapped their code editor to a different part of the code base. They could be working on a completely different feature at that point in time. So immediately there's a problem where that bug is a context switch. That developer has to down tools, work on that bug, fix it, verify it, push it back in, go back to what they were working on. The other problem that we found is that there's a massive disconnect. The engineer is no longer spending their time worrying about that feature being on production. They're worrying about it being pushed to develop. It's somebody else's problem to push it to testing, and it's somebody else's problem to test it, and it's somebody else's problem to tell me if there's a problem with it. So our developers were starting to lose that relationship between what our end users were using on the product and what they were working on. And again, that's not a good thing. The other thing that I think is worth kind of talking about, this is probably a whole talk on its own, is that by making the QA process somebody else's problem, the developers weren't considering testability. You know, it's not something they would think about their unit testing, but they wouldn't think about testability from a manual perspective or from an end-to-end automation perspective. So actually that means it becomes harder later on. And if we were to bring that process right in and kind of stall those developers until they get stuff out to production, that will kill velocity even more. And again, there's probably a whole talk on how you kind of get your QA process into the cycle. But what did we do? Well, actually, we decided to re-architect our teams. Our QA was always considered to be like an overlay resource. So they would overlay on the engineering teams that were building the actual bits of features, and they were there to support, but they weren't really in the team. They were kind of there as a bystander. And so we did this with actually all of these resources that we regard as being overlaid, so UX, SRE, so system reliability engineering, and QA. And so we brought them into the fold, into the gang. And so what that means is that they're there when we're doing the planning, they're there on every single stand-up, and it means that they're there throughout the process. And it means that they can actually be the advisor. They can actually, so actually at this point, we're now getting huge value from our internal tester. They're now able to use their resources, their experience to influence even how we're building pieces of code, how we're releasing that, at what point we can release code out. And the way that we looked at it is that there's a toolbox. There's a toolbox of things which our QA testers could potentially use. And so it might be that for a particular feature that we're really interested in getting a really high level of unit testing. It might be that we're doing some other work where actually we're not interested in that unit testing, we just want to get some rough user feedback on a prototype, in which case it's not necessarily important. But we've got all our kind of classic ones in here of end-to-end automation testing. We flipped that actually. We decided to change the way that we were approaching it. No longer were we trying to knock down the number of manual test cases that we were putting over to GAT at weekend, but actually go, that's really good testing. We're getting really high value back from that level of testing. What can we do to actually improve the process for our engineers? Well, the problem with the end-to-end tests is they were running overnight. And that's kind of no good. It's kind of, you know, you've closed your computer down for the night and you get it the next day. Could we bring that actually into the CI/CD pipeline so that we run those end-to-end tests as the developer's doing a commit or they're doing a pull request, so that we can kind of get that right in that point where they're actually trying to merge code in and get some immediate feedback. And that meant that we had to put a lot of effort actually into speeding those up, changing them from just the same test cases as we were doing from a manual perspective, but actually bringing them as a scenario test. And again, there's probably a whole presentation we could do on how to get value out of that. But from the manual perspective, we decided to keep all of those. We're getting really high value out of them. The impact to us was actually quite low, with the added advantage of putting more end-to-end tests within the actual CI process. It meant that we were ticking the box of getting some immediate feedback. And then the last thing, the kind of piece of the puzzle, was actually how do we get immediate end-user feedback. So we started taking advantage of GAT's exploratory testing using their SaaS platform. And what that means is that we can, within that team, decide on a particular feature that we want to get some early feedback on. We can actually push that over to our testers to give us some feedback within a couple of hours. So we can actually ask them to run some black and white testing, or we can actually ask them to just do some exploratory testing around the feature. But the advantage is we get that in that day. We might do a merge to our code base on a Tuesday. We can get some feedback within that day. We don't have to wait for the weekend. We don't have to wait for a merge point on a Friday. We can get that straight back in, which means those developers can act upon that immediately. And the way that we think about them is actually we think about our exploratory tests as our beta users. So they have access just like anybody else to our platform, but they actually give us some immediate feedback like a beta user would do. So we found that really valuable because it comes into that team. Our QA resource within that team helps triage that to understand what's valuable and what's not, but then works with the engineers to actually get that resolved. And it could be usability issues. It could be that actually we struggle with the end users being able to use that particular feature. It could be that there's actually regressions that we ask them to test around that feature, but it can be really highly targeted. So we kind of come to the end of the story, and what actually impact has this had of actually changing the dynamics within the team, changing the way that we approach testing, how when we're taking in different styles of manual testing, but really focusing it within that team. Well, this is a little kind of chart of what our deployments look like in previous days. We were very much a Monday push to production. No pushes on a Friday, that was always banned, but that wasn't a problem because nobody actually merged anything until a Friday. So everybody was merging code on a Friday, regardless of whether it is an end user bit of code change. It could be a back-end API change, but actually because there's no point pushing it into production because the testers wouldn't look at it until the weekend, why would we bother pushing it at any other point to production? So everything got done on a Monday, which basically meant that half of Friday was merge hell and half of Monday was production deployment hell, and that's not really a good place to be. So I pulled some stats down from last week of how we're actually working now, and I'm pleased to say that it looks a lot more healthy. We have lots of deployments that happen throughout the week, and actually what this means for us is that we're deploying much smaller chunks, and that's really important. Smaller chunks are much easier to test than a big load of weeks worth of work. We found we could make a huge amount of progress in a week and cause our testers complete hell by the time we got to the end of the week where all the tests need to actually be rewritten. By breaking this down to much smaller chunks and delivering it when it's ready rather than because it's a Friday, meant that we can test it quickly, get feedback, get it in the hands of users. We also put in things like shadow deployments, so we can still push to production. We don't have to actually release it to any of our users, but we can actually get GAT to test it for us on an alpha feature before anybody else has actually used it with some production-like data. And so we also get our Friday afternoons back, that's a plus, and also our Monday mornings back. And actually, not only does it de-risk our QA cycles, but it actually kind of de-risks just everything throughout the week. If we're deploying much smaller chunks repeatedly over the week, then actually any negative impacts can be reduced and it's spotted sooner. So all positive. So what are our takeaways? Well, I think we found it quite tough to think about all aspects of QA early on. In the start of the business, we were very, very laser focused on delivering a product. We had a very small level of seed investment in the business that basically paid for paper clips and a couple of coffees. And so even the idea of getting external resources at that point was definitely not achievable. But as we started to scale up, we found it really valuable to actually get a partner involved in helping us with testing. Because although I've got far too much time in software world, it's always been somebody else's problem. And this is kind of the first startup where it's become my problem to deal with. And so actually using GAT to help us, not only to add that kind of muscle behind testing, but also to give us advice and you know, just support, was really valuable. And I definitely would recommend taking that kind of approach if that's suitable for you. Definitely think about the effort you're putting in versus the reward you're getting out. Just because that's what the book says to do doesn't mean it necessarily applies to your particular scenario. There's a whole different toolbox of QA capabilities that you can apply to your solution that enables you to get that quality metric that you want. But you know, we went down a bit of a path of doing something which we thought was the right thing to do, investing lots in it, and actually not getting much reward back. And in fact, actually having a negative impact on what we're doing. And definitely the last part of it is, you know, QA shouldn't be an afterthought. You should build it up from day one. I think one of the things that I would take away from our experience is that if we had thought about it earlier on, then we probably would have made some changes sooner, but we weren't really thinking about it. So I hope you found that story interesting. Happy to take kind of Q&A. I will be at the GAT stand afterwards if you want to grab me there as well. Yeah.
This is really interesting. What's next?
What's next?
What are there any other sort of improvements you're looking at making, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we'd like to actually remove that weekend manual testing and make it fully in the week, and be able to, you know, do partial runs of our test case document throughout the week. And we're working with GAT to do that. So that'll be a big plus. We're still absolutely doing automation as well. It's not that we're kind of like going absolutely everything that you do should be manually tested. You know, we've got load testing that we do on our ad serving part of our infrastructure. You know, that's not something you're going to be able to do manually. So we're doubling down on that actually to make sure that we, you know, getting really good historical metrics. Actually, that's an interesting one for us. Yeah, performance, we're less interested in like somebody releasing a bit of code that decreases performance. That you notice pretty damn quickly. It's actually the boiling of the frog mentality where every single release you lose 1 or 2% of your performance, and then a year down the line you're like, why is this running so slow? So actually we're putting some stuff in right now to prevent that. The other thing we're looking at is doing some visual testing. So actually we're getting, you know, style regressions are really hard to pick up from an automated perspective. We get those as part of our exploratory testing, but only if those testers understand what good looks like and what bad looks like. So again, the approach is there to try and get feedback earlier, so we can at least highlight those areas of the application which look like it's broken from a style perspective and get some feedback.